Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you to our witnesses for your testimony today. I have to confess to being surprised to hearing some of the protest about this direct relief for the people. I think there's a reason that 80% of the American public supports this COVID relief legislation. And to address some statements made by a colleague earlier, working families in this country are not playing the stock market with this money. Working families in Georgia and across the country have had to bear extraordinary childcare costs, have faced significant loss of employment, medical bills, already were in a precarious financial situation to begin with in many cases. And this is a bipartisan relief effort in that it has the overwhelming support of a vast majority of the American people. And I hope that colleagues on both sides of the aisle can come together and instead of becoming bogged down in factional disputes, swiftly and in a united way, move this legislation, this COVID relief legislation through the Senate. I want to address a question to you, Mayor Brown, and ask you, and then I'd like as well for Mr. Tsushima to address this as well. What are the forms of exploitation and abuse that those constituents you serve, in your case, Mayor, and Mr. Tsushima, the legal aid clients that you serve, are facing during this crisis?
Senator, thank you so much for the question. I think I'll start in the housing area. And I spoke earlier about the city of Youngstown and facing a recovering economy. We have what we consider predatory lenders from foreign investors that would invest in places like Youngstown, Ohio, where they're taking property sight unseen, but they're raising those dollars and on the backs of the poor people that are paying 2 to 3 times as much in rent monthly than an average individual should have to do that. What we're finding also that they're having them enter into land contracts, and the contracts are not even binding, or there's some stipulations if you miss a few payments that we've had to have several of our local advocate groups actually take them to court to fight for that. So the predatory lending about the rent rate, and then we have the issue of where they're giving them a land contract. And the one thing many of the people I represent here in the city of Youngstown want, they want to be homeowners. And when that contract is dangled in front of them, and then it's actually a false pretense, it causes some predatory lending practice here in the community where I represent.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Tsushima?
Senator Ossoff, thank you for your question. I would fully agree with Mayor Brown's response, especially in the housing area. We see quite a bit of predatory housing in Columbus, and this has been a practice even before the pandemic. It's just something that has become a much more intense practice. And a lot of that is just due to tenants and homeowners are scrambling to find funds where they can. For homeowners, a lot of homeowners who cannot pay their mortgage, cannot pay their taxes, they're looking for quick sources of income to pay things off. And sometimes they just don't know what the consequence of not paying their mortgage or taxes are. So what ends up happening is they get approached by somebody who recognizes that they're desperate, and they'll try to maybe buy their property for real cheap, but with by making these sort of threats that give the homeowner an expectation that if they don't get the mortgage or taxes paid immediately, then there's going to be maybe criminal consequences or some other type of civil legal consequences that is going to put them in the hole even further. So they end up becoming so desperate, they just end up paying, or they end up just selling their homes to get out of this hole. And for renters, it's a similar scenario. They're desperate to pay rent, so they're much more likely to get short-term high-interest loans. They're more likely to start cutting back on essentials like food, medicine, utilities. It just creates very risky behaviors that open a lot of these people up to predatory behaviors that take advantage of their desperation.
Thank you, Mr. Tsushima, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Senator of Tennessee for first hearing on the banking housing